Guns. Sorry, wait. Let's do that again. Cat, say go.
Go.
The Fantasmagorium show presents Guns, Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns. James Bond has been captured. Someone set him up. The answers will shock you. In the final film of the Brosnan era, Eon pulls out all the stops. Oscar winner Halle Berry joins Rosamund Pike, Toby Stevens, and Rick Yoon in the Madonna-fueled Shrill Ride. Shrill Ride? I'm sure I meant to put Thrill Ride. That is Die Another Day. My name is Scotty. My opposite number, Catherine, is here, and Steve had the good sense to stay the hell away from this movie. What's going on, Cat?
I just finished the film.
And? Oh, come on.
Yeah.
Well, before we get to any of that, there is good news this week.
There is.
There have been a couple of nominations for awards coming up.
A few. Bond scored 3 Oscar nominations for sound, visual effects, and original song.
I really enjoy the sound nomination just because of the moment when Bond gets blowed up at Vesper's mausoleum kind of thing, and the tinnitus and that sort of ambiance. Like, I don't know how many people saw it in a theater. I saw it in my car and then at home again many times, but it was really good sound design in terms of the disorientation. I thought it actually added to the film, and so I'm glad that it is. It doesn't seem like a token nomination the same way that the, best original song for a film. It's like, well, Billie Eilish should just pick that up now.
Yeah.
Like,
just real quick, is the background there?
The background?
On our show, I'm just seeing our 2 screens. Usually we see the background with the...
Oh, my mistake. I didn't press the right button. You're absolutely correct.
There we go. That's better.
My mistake.
Yeah,
I have other buttons too. I can do stuff.
I didn't check out what the Bafta nominations were. I think those came out recently, but I probably should have checked that. But I think that it has a shot for original song and maybe for visual effects, given that the Academy has a tendency to lean towards visual effects that look photoreal, which Free Guy, Spider-Man, and Shang-Chi aren't, but Dune will be the primary competition there. I don't think it has a shot at sound, even though it was really good. I think that's probably also going to go to Dune. But, we'll see. I was hoping that it would get a production design nomination. That design was just unbelievable.
Well, we've been gushing about that sort of homage to certain aspects of Dr. Mo since forever. And so, yeah, I thought that they would at least acknowledge that in terms of the Oscars like classic Hollywood to a certain extent.
Well, that and when they the fact that the whole Cuba sequence, they rebuilt all that on the back lot at Pinewood, the interior and the exterior of the town square from the nightclub. It's like, that's all fake. And I'm like, that is really cool. So, I was hopeful that would get a nomination. And, Bond's bungalow was awesome. And looking at how they designed the town square, because the bells in the square where they have DB5, those aren't there. They built a facade for that. They had to put in all the fake walls so they could safely do the donuts and stuff like that. So I thought it would get a shot at that, but it didn't.
Well, if we do an Oscar show, I'm sure we'll discuss all of their failings incredibly. LDG of Geeks and Joy, hello.
Hello.
Thank you for tuning in. If this is your first time here, please consider subscribing and like and share. And is that good enough? Can I stop?
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. So I'm just super jazzed because I've heard some blowback. Well, I'm not super jazzed that I heard some blowback about No Time to Die, the song, but I think it's better than Sam Smith's Writing on the Wall. And Sam Smith's Writing on the Wall got an Oscar. And so if No Time to Die doesn't get an Oscar, I'm again going to flip the poker table and be like, this is bull.
I haven't heard the other songs, so I can't speak to that.
Sam Smith, or the other songs in the category for this year?
Yeah,
yes,
the other songs in the category. I can't remember what the other nominees are. I don't think I've seen most of those films yet. When the Oscar nominations came out yesterday, I made a whole list of films I have to see, and the first one I watched was Power of the Dog last night, because that's leading with 12, and God, that was awful. But oh well, we're here for Bond, so
we are here for Bond. All I'm saying,
we're here for a different type of awful tonight.
Oh my stars! And it is a delightful awful. So, is there anything else going on in the world of Bond? Or can we just get to No Time to Die? Or sorry, Die Another Day.
You mean Die Another? No,
I know I'm going to do that.
Day. So
I'm going to do it the end.
This is a movie they tried to get Michael Apted to direct. Actually, they offered it to him first because he directed the last one, The World Is On Up. But then they rescinded the offer and asked Tony Scott and John Woo to do it, and they both declined. And then they lowered their sights to guys like, Stuart Baird, Brett Ratner, Robinson. And I'm like, they're kind of, I guess their first choices were, go back to Michael Apted in that case if he was open to doing it. But eventually, even Pierce Brosnan was actually talking to Martin Scorsese and informally offered it to him on a flight. And he was like, hey, you interested, kind of thing. But they ended up getting Lee Tamahori instead, who had made Once Were Warriors, which is a really great New Zealand drama. But I guess that was an odd choice for Bond. It's like, okay. And they for this story, they combined some plot elements from the book Moonraker, which involved a Nazi switching place to the British industrialists to try and get revenge on England for winning the war by firing a nuke at London. And then it took some inspiration from The Man with the Golden Gun, where Bond is kind of brainwashed and goes after M or whatever, in the sense that this film where M, thinks after Bond's been tortured, he can't be trusted and stuff like that. So they pilfered a little bit from the books, but for the most part, this movie feels like it's primarily concerned with two things. One is homaging as much of the first 40 years as Bond as possible. Secondly, try and appeal to young people no matter what. It doesn't matter how much you have to dumb it down or lower your dignity. Whatever you can do to get young people on board, do it. Because some have said this movie caters to 14-year-olds, and I think that's a pretty good way to sum it up. I was 14 when this movie came out. I remember the marketing blitz was huge. I don't think the marketing blitz for the 50th anniversary Skyfall wasn't anywhere near as big as the marketing blitz for Die Another Day. It was massive. It was everywhere. And this is in the early days of the internet, and it was still on every website.
Well, and don't forget, this was the 20th James Bond, so this was an anniversary of sorts, and so everyone was super jazzed for it, and they wanted it to happen. Not only the people who were marketing to the younger generation, but the people who had grown up with it. When I watched, and I did watch the trailer, I was like, this is your dad's James Bond to the extreme. And it's just,
I remember I really
this is my dad's whenever I go and see my dad, and he's like, you watch any James Bond lately? And he's like, yeah, I did. And what did you watch? And he's like, Die Another Day. And I was like, why?
I really love. Wait, is that true?
Yeah.
Then he has no business criticizing No Time to Die if he absolutely loves Die Another Day.
He's an old man. He's allowed to have his proclivities.
I don't recall many old-timer Bond fans liking this movie. I recall there being a lot of disdain from the old school Bond fans for this one.
Well,
but I did love the poster for this. It was very minimalist. It was just Bond smoking gun on the ice table with a gray background.
Yeah, no, that was good. The teaser poster,
that was
great.
That was a nice poster. So yeah, I didn't see this in theaters though. And I don't remember seeing any marketing for the previous Brosnan Bonds, even though I was aware of them or had already been a fan by that point. So I ended up getting the 2-disc special edition DVD of this, which came out 20 years ago, almost 19 years ago. Yeah, February 03. So it was a different experience to watch this movie again, to say the least.
Would you like to see something? Would you like to see something incredibly disappointing?
Huh. You have two of them.
No, but wait for it. Look at the bottom. Can you read the bottom?
Full screen?
Yeah.
Is the one behind you widescreen?
Of course. Why do you think I put this one on the floor? It doesn't. I didn't even take out the used video store stickers. It's a coaster.
Is that the original one you got?
That's oh no, I've bought. You know what, Kat? I hate to admit to you, and I'm sure no one else is paying attention. I've bought this movie like a lot. Like this is one of those movies that just comes in a set. It's like you get Die Another Day for free, and it's like, can I have something better? And it's like, nope, you get Die Another Day for free. I didn't want Die Another Day, so anytime I buy anything, it usually comes with a free Die Another Day.
That's funny.
Thank you. Shall we discuss Die Another Day from the top? Start with the surfing.
Well, we begin with the gun barrel logo.
Oh
Bond
no,
shooting
I
at the
forgot.
camera.
Yes.
It's kind of nice revisiting these older movies and seeing like the original gun barrel logo.
Yeah.
And not all the fancy stuff they did in the Craig era. So that was kind of neat. So the great thing about this surfing sequence, it's at night and you have Bond and a couple other guys surfing into North Korea. But they filmed this off of Jaws, which is the name of these famous waves off the North Shores of Kauai. And you have to get like some really expert surfers to do this. They got some professionals, and it looks awesome. But that creates a problem for something they chose to do much later in the movie. You're going to open your movie with a legit awesome surfing shots like this. You can't do what they do later in the movie, but we'll get to that when we get there. So Bond and the other agents get on shore, and they start moving through the forest or whatever, and they come upon this helicopter. This guy's landing there. His name is Mr. Van Veer. He's got a suitcase full of diamonds, African conflict diamonds. Bond and his agents get up there and take the guy's place. They fly out to the nearby North Korean military base. They're in the DMZ. And they land, and Bond gets out, and he's changed clothes with this guy. He looks similar, and he's already taken the C4 and planted it underneath the diamonds inside the suitcase. And he's carrying the suitcase, and he's going to greet these two guys. One is Colonel Moon. I forgot to look up the actor's name. I can't believe I did, but he's great. He was in a lot of other movies. He should have been the villain all the way through because he was very good in this prologue, I thought. Standing by his side is Zhao, who's a terrorist who
is played by Rick Yoon.
Yes, Rick Yoon, and they tell you about him a lot. He's a character who I guess we're supposed to be afraid of, but we don't ever really get to, unfortunately, see him do too much. He's just kind of there. Anyway, Bond hands the diamonds, and Colonel Moon's talking to him about what he's going to gift him, and Bond's like, well, what am I getting out of this? And Colonel Moon brings in these awesome hovercrafts, and he says there's 1 million mines in the DMZ separating the North from the South, but my hovercrafts float right over them. And Bond's like, oh, that's pretty badass. And so Zhao's going to inspect the diamonds, but he gets a phone call. And he answers the phone, he's talking, and then he comes over to talk to Colonel Moon, who I forgot to mention, when you first meet Moon, he's actually beating up a punching bag, which has his anger management therapist in it.
Yeah.
So he's
using his therapist as a heavy bag.
Yeah, and so Zhao comes over, whispers to him, his name's James Bond, a British assassin. And I love the look on Colonel Moon's face. He kind of keeps a straight face, and he gets this wicked smile on his face. He's like, Mr. Van Veer. He's like, one thing I want to show you. And he gets out this big, I don't even know what it is. It's like a grenade launcher / gun, and he spins around and shoots the whatchamacallit, the airplane thing that Bond arrived in, blows it to smithereens. And they seize Bond, and they seize him and disarm him, and he turns over. Colonel Moon looks to him. He's like, how do you propose to kill me now, Mr. Bond? And then you have your dramatic sound beat.
Dun, dun,
and
dun.
the explosion it's great. It's like this big dun, dun, dun moment. But then the fires are starting to cause a problem. And they're like, sir, your father's coming. And we see that there's a military convoy probably about a few hundred yards away. And we see General Moon, his father, riding with some other military officials. And he sees all the smoke. It's like, what's this about? And Colonel Moon's like, let's get out of here. Kill the spy. And then Bond triggers the suitcase bomb,
which blows up in Zhao's face.
Yes, it should have killed Zhao because this was like a block of C4, but it succeeds in blasting a bunch of diamonds in his face.
We needed a guy with diamonds in his face.
Yeah, blast a bunch of diamonds in his face. Bond takes off and gets on one of the hovercrafts. Colonel Moon gets on another one, and I actually thought this action sequence is kind of cool. So they're chasing each other in these hovercrafts.
Awesome.
Yeah, and they're hovering over the minefield, and they're crashing into the little gun turrets and things like that, and shooting back and forth. It's pretty cool. Eventually, they get onto a railway track, like a side road, with a whole other convoy of military equipment that Colonel Moon's trying to move out of there as quickly as possible before his father shows up. because his father's not corrupt like him, and he's not going to be happy to see all these weapons in the DMZ. And so Colonel Moon's just losing it, picking a machine gun and firing at Bond. And at one point, he gets these hovercrafts obviously have the giant fan blades on them, and Moon ends up getting kind of sucked against it, hanging on and for dear life as they go plowing off a cliff. And Bond grabs onto the bell rope from this bell hanging up this religious structure as the hovercraft goes between it and soars off the cliff, crashes down below in a waterfall. And Bond just kind of dangles there for a minute. He lets go, and rather than trying to run away, he's just kind of breathing and kind of calming down as the general and the whole posse shows up. And the general looks down, and he's clearly upset and mourning his son. And Bond, for some reason, is just being kind of cheeky with him. And I'm like, dude, you should have jumped off the water, down the waterfall, or ran for it, or been more respectful in this moment. And maybe the colonel wouldn't have turned you over to this prison. But he does anyway, and he gets taken away. And then we have we bleed into this.
Well, not taken away. We have James Bond captured by the North Korean government for espionage and the murder of one
Colonel Moon.
Colonel Moon. There are two Moons, aren't there?
Yeah.
General and Colonel.
Yeah. Right. Father and son.
Quite. No, I know. And I do agree with you in terms of I really wish the actor who played Colonel Moon in the beginning, I wish that there was some sort of like Tyler Durden way to bring him back when he becomes the villain, because he's already the villain. And I like this villain. Anyway, now, Madonna.
Yeah, so this title song
is on like your iPod.
Song. It's like a nightclub song. And I admit this sequence is unique because it's like the only main title sequence in a Bond movie where it's actually a scene from the movie. It's Bond being tortured for 14 months with like scorpions and the like and frozen water or whatever.
Yeah.
And the song is what it is. It's either you like it or you hate it. And there's an extended party mix version also that runs through the end credits. But okay. So we come out, I admit that is unique though to make that a scene in the movie. So we come out of that, and it's been 14 months since Bond's incarceration. And Colonel Moon or General Moon comes in to see him one day, and he's like, I don't condone what they do here. And I'm thinking, you're the one who seized him and handed him over. You must have known what was going on, but okay. And he's like, oh, besides, and he asks him who betrayed, because General Moon doesn't seem to think that his son would just be capable of becoming corrupt like that. Somebody had to be responsible. And he's like, who is it? And Bond's like, well, the same person who betrayed me. And the general's upset. He's like, oh, it's out of my hands now. It's too bad. So they take Bond in this truck to this bridge crossing where there's a lot of fog, and they Bond out of the truck, and the general tries to appeal to him one more time. It doesn't work. And for some reason, the general takes the time to have all his guards come out and line up like a firing squad as Bond starts, and Bond thinks he's about to die. And he's turns his back on them, and all of a sudden the guards like change their minds and run back into the truck. And he's like, what's going on? And he hears voices on the loudspeaker. So he starts walking across the bridge, and emerging from the fog on the other side is Zhao in this orange jumpsuit. And Bond's like, prisoner exchange, too much of a price to let you out. And for some reason, Zhao didn't bother getting the diamonds out of his face in prison. Or maybe he was that much of a badass that anybody who tried, he just beat the shit out of him.
This is a common complaint when it comes to this movie. And I did look through it with a little bit of a forgiving eye. And you know what? I'm fine with Zhao being Diamond Face. I'm fine with it. It's ridiculous. It's no more ridiculous than anything else we've ever seen in James Bond. The only thing that is the most ridiculous is the fact that he was in custody.
Yeah.
And the authorities didn't want those diamonds back. Never mind. I retract my previous statement. It's ridiculous. And no. Moving on.
So Bond gets across the bridge. He's immediately put onto a stretcher and knocked unconscious. He wakes up inside this ship off the coast of Hong Kong. Yes. And he's in this room. He can't get out. It's like, I guess it's, he can't break the glass or whatever. And M comes to greet him, and she's being a real bitch about it. It's like, it's not his fault. He explains what happened. She's like, well, we had information that the American head of the North Korean intelligence or whatever was outed and executed last week. And there was a ping, and they traced it back to you, so they thought that you had cracked under pressure and were giving up names, so they had to get you out. And Bond's like, I didn't do it. It wasn't me. Whoever it was is the same person who sold me out, because they got a phone call, and all of a sudden I was, it was up. And she's not sympathetic at all. For some reason, she blames him entirely, even though Bond's made it clear that, dude, you have a leak somewhere. And she's just not going to accept responsibility for it. Like, no, whatever. And so she just kind of leaves and very callously says, the only place you're going to, is the detention center at the Falkland base or whatever, because you're no use to anyone anymore. And Bond's like, no, I'm going after him, And so she leaves, and then Bond does this neat thing where I guess he trained himself to sort of lower his heartbeat, I guess, while he was in prison. Because that's how he tricks them into...
Yeah.
What?
I cannot accept the fact that he has done some sort of Zen training where he can relax himself enough to stop his own heart or slow his own heart to the point where electronic devices will not register it. Thusly, like, this is something outside of the realm of what James Bond can do, in my opinion. This is where it loses me.
Yeah, so he does that.
This is superhero level.
So he does that, and then the hospital people come in. He knocks him aside. He locks him in the room. He says, thanks for the kiss of life. Which is odd because nobody kissed him. And then he leaves.
Well, no, the nurse gave mouth to mouth.
I didn't notice that. So he leaves. He goes outside. He jumps overboard, swims to shore, and then marches into this hotel like a boss. And doesn't care that he's totally disheveled and all that in this hospital gown or whatever.
He looks like Robinson Crusoe.
He walks in like a boss, doesn't care that he's disheveled and all that shit, walks right up to the counter, and he tells the concierge, my usual room, Presidential Suite. And they're like, no, you. And then this guy walks up behind him, this Chinese guy, and he's like, yes, give Mr. Bond the usual suite. And they're like, yes, right away. So he goes there, and you have your product placement with the Bollinger and all that kind of crap, and Bond completely, he shaves, he gets all cleaned up and in his tux again. This lady comes in to give him a massage, and Bond knows better, so he pulls a pistol up from her leg and shoots the window, or shoots the mirror. And of course, it's a two-way mirror where you have a ridiculous amount of people hiding behind there to film him, presumably for blackmail purposes.
3 people.
And it's like all you need is like a guy with one little camcorder. You don't need all this shit, but okay.
No, you needed one guy on the computer, one guy on the camera, and one guy supervising.
Yeah, you don't need a computer because you have the camera. It's like, just hold the camera, so whatever. So Bond is like, he's like, what, you think I didn't know you worked for the Chinese government? And he's like, Mr. Bond, Hong Kong is ours. It's over. And he's like, cool your jets, man. I'm not here to steal Hong Kong. I'm here for Zhao. And he's like, Zhao, what do you want with him? He killed 3 of our agents. And Bond's like, yeah. And I got problems with him too. I got personal beef. Why don't you if you get me into North Korea, I'll kill him for you. And he's like, well, I'm going to have to clear it with Beijing. And he's like, well, you do that. So he says, get out. So he ushers him out, and he's like, well, unless you want to let this lady give me a massage. And then he just kind of, the guy coyly turns to her, and he's like, come on. So they leave the room, and Bond comes downstairs either later that night or the next morning. He's in his tux, ready to go. And Mr. Ling is at the desk again. He's like, oh, Mr. Bond, being all cordial. And he says, oh, here's a gift from us to you. And he's got passports to Cuba. And Bond's like, Cuba? And he says, yes, it seems Mr. Zhao got himself lost in Havana. Make sure if you see him to send him a goodbye from us. And Bond's like, oh, yeah, sure, no problem. So then we go to Cuba. Yes, we have some spunky music.
Yeah!
Bond's moving through the street. He goes to a cigar factory, and he says, I want a Delgado. And the guy at the counter is like, we haven't sold those in 30 years. And he's like, call your boss. Tell him I'm from Universal Exports. So he does. He's like, okay, right this way. And he takes him upstairs, and we meet Raul.
Wait. Kat, hang on just 1 second. When was the last time you and I encountered Delectados?
No Time to Die.
There we are. Moving on. I thought you'd enjoy the nostalgia. Come on.
Yeah. So he gets up there, and he's talking to Raul, who's basically kind of like the Pedro Almodovar's character from Russia with Love. I think that's that type of counterpart. He's meeting Bond for the first time. He takes an instant liking to him. He gives him cigars, and Bond's talking to him about, he's talking to him about Zhao and how he's a problem. You don't really want him here. I'll take care of it. Blah blah blah. And he's like, okay. And he says you're gonna find that he's at this clinic on this island. And he's like, well, what's he doing there? It's like, I don't know. Like Bond's like, well, I'm gonna need a fast car. It's like, okay. So then we cut to Bond driving a really fucking badass car.
Oh, wait, no. You forgot a couple of things. There was, okay, so Bond is walking around the office of the gentleman, and he picks up the ornithology book, Birds of the West Indies by James Bond. The inspiration for the character's name of James Bond. Ian Fleming himself said that he saw that book and thought that James Bond was the most boring name he had ever heard, and he wanted to use that character name to elevate the adventure. How could a man so boring have adventures so great? Said the foppish former veteran of the British intelligence. Anyway, moving on. So, and then the gun. And so, yes, I just wanted to highlight the book because I think it's a really, as you mentioned at the beginning, this is a movie that is reverential to the history of James Bond. And I liked that they dropped that sort of nugget of literary reference. So anyway, he gets a fast car and it is awesome. It looks great.
Yeah, I can't remember the make and model. I wasn't paying attention, and so it's like a Bel Air or something like that. So he drives to this hotel down by the beach, and they do the Dr. No shot where he sees Jinx come out of the water, and she's wearing the orange bikini, and it looks kind of the same as the Honey Rider one, except it's orange. He then greets her at the bar, and they have a bunch of non-innuendos and just atrocious dialogue in this film.
Oh my God. Well, that's also why I brought up ornithologist, is because Halle Berry does very much just like say, oh, that's going to be a mouthful. And it's like, you're not referring to the word. We know you're talking about something else. It's very laden with innuendo.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. I can't even remember what they said. It was just terrible.
Good for you. Block it out.
They end up sleeping with each other that night because, of course, in the morning he finds that Jinx is gone, and he decides and he sees her taking the boat over to the island, and he decides he's going to get over there by going over to this rude customer who was at the hotel, and he goes to his hotel room and he just punches the guy out immediately after offering him a wheelchair. So he puts him in a wheelchair, and that's how he's able to get a boat over the island, and he wheels the guy into the main entrance, and he just kind of, what?
Well, that guy, the guy that he punches out and puts in a wheelchair to use as a decoy to get onto the island, that guy had originally, he had said that he was going to shoot off a waiter's privates.
Yeah.
So they established, oh my. Anyway,
right.
So plot happens moving forward.
And so then Bond just kind of pushes this guy's wheelchair down the hallway, and then he sneaks into this person's like hospital room through the window so he can access another part of the building, and he starts snooping around. Meanwhile, Jinx is in a meeting with the doctor at this facility at the clinic, and he's talking about how they use like children as their guinea pigs and stuff. And
no, they say they harvest organs from the homeless and from and they harvest genetic material from the unwanted of society. Homeless people or orphans, or it's ridiculous. Children.
He mentions that, and then he mentions the DNA therapy. Yes. And the DNA therapy where you can change yourself from Asian to white. That's where the movie fell off a cliff for me. It didn't come back. It's like, no, there's certain levels of absurdity you just can't do even in a Bond movie. And she just promptly shoots him dead and just starts rummaging through his files. Bond, meanwhile, keeps moving through the building. He finds his way into this secret lab, and in the back he finds Zhao lying down in this hospital bed wearing this weirdo psychedelic kind of mask with all these little threads hanging off of it. And he lifts up the mask and kind of, taps the glass, sees that Zhao is still asleep. So then Bond just grabs his IV bag and squeezes it really tight to wake him up. Wakes up Zhao and he starts to interrogate him, but not in a smart way. He's like, oh, I thought I'd lift you back in North Korea. And of course, Zhao just I don't have time for this. And he just kicks Bond immediately He starts fighting him. Bond turns on the MRI machine at one point, which causes all these sharp objects to fly against the machine, miraculously missing Zhao. And you have a bit of slow motion in here for some reason as things start sparking during their fight.
Oh my god, I don't even know what that's called. What is it called? I thought it was called like rack. There's rack zooming, and then there's I don't even know what the technical terms are, but the Lee Tamahori, terrible editing decisions throughout.
Yes, so they're getting in their fight. Zhao quickly breaks out of the room, runs for it. Jinx, hearing all this going on, sets a C4 bomb in the file cabinet in the guy's room. Yes, and she detonates it quickly afterwards. That causes an evacuation. She ends up running up this grassy knoll outside, shooting at Zhao and his goons as they're escaping in this helicopter they've just hijacked. She does manage to shoot one of them. Bond, meanwhile, uses his giant oxygen tank and knocks out the knob so that way it takes off like a rocket.
Well, that was
breaking
cool.
A hole in the building. Yeah, that was cool. Breaks a hole in the building. He comes out. He sees that the helicopter's gotten away, and he walks up the stairs to be on the rooftop of the terrace by the edge of the cliff. And Jinx has been cornered up there by these two military guys, and she's got her dress on, and they put their guns at her. Put your gun down. So she puts her gun down, and then she takes off her dress, and she's wearing the bikini underneath it. And they do the thing where the army guards suddenly become like immature and are like, oh, she's hot, and just kind of lose track of what they're supposed to be doing. And she looks at Bond and gives him a wink, and then she just does this backwards swan dive off the cliff. Really high cliff, mind you, but you could tell in this whole shot where the collection of shots when they were up there that they were on green screen.
Yeah.
Even the reverse shot of Bond, the close up looking at him, you could tell it was green screen. Like they're not up there on this terrace.
This is the next time. And when you mentioned, and it's like, this is the part when I jumped off the cliff. It's like, I thought you were referring to this, because this is the moment where I'm just like, so we don't even care about live action stunts.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, I guess they got somebody to do the initial dive just into like a shallow pool or something, and then they just did the digital stuff. But this height.
Weird, yeah.
Even at this, there's no way somebody's gonna dive from that height and live without having several broken bones.
Especially not backwards. But I'm just saying it's a long way to go, and that's why I say it is turning it up too much. It's like.
Yes.
In GoldenEye, we saw someone jump off of a bridge or a dam with a bungee cord, and that was a practical effect. And now we have Halle Berry on a green screen. And I venture to say a blue screen.
Yeah, and this is the same movie where we started with a legit surfing stunt off Jaws, and it's like, what? Why are we doing? It's like, I don't know. So she gets onto this boat, which looks suspiciously familiar to the one from the pre-title sequence of The World Is Not Enough that the cigar girl was on. And she rides away, and she kind of salutes Bond as she's getting away. And even though Bond's got a gun on him, I guess those two military guards weren't bothered by him being armed and creating havoc. And so he leaves. We then cut to MI6, where M is having a tense meeting, like a video chat with this guy from the NSA or the CIA, played Mr. Falco, played by Michael Madsen. And he's like, my agent was undercover there. We were doing some good work, and until your Bond came in and shot up the place. So he's blatantly lying because Jinx is the one who set off the bomb and planted it. Obviously, she didn't just find that somewhere. They gave it to her for the express purpose of blowing this place up. I forgot to mention during the fight, Bond did swap this bullet necklace off of Zhao's neck.
And he got the conflict. Yeah.
Well, he goes back to see Raoul, and he shows Raoul what these are, and he says, "Oh, conflict diamonds," and it's initialed Gustav Graves. And in typical old school Bond fashion, that must mean the CEO and founder is the bad guy. It can't be any of the underlings or anything like that. And meanwhile, is kind of miffed to find out from the CIA that Bond has blown up this facility or whatever. He's like, "You need to get control of your guys." So then Bond flies to home to London.
With one of the only few popular songs played in a James Bond film.
I thought you were going to say the cameo by Roger Moore's daughter in this scene, where he's on the plane and she's a flight attendant, offers him the drink, and he's reading a magazine article about Gustav Graves, and then they start playing the London Calling song.
I was referring to the London Calling song.
Yeah. And so that song's playing as Gustav Graves skydives out of this airplane and lands outside Buckingham Palace, and there's a whole media frenzy there. And he's like this really obnoxious guy.
What a day to become a knight.
What a day to become a knight. And, oh, mister, how do you get all the time in the day to do everything? He's like, you only get one shot at life. Why waste it on sleep? And they're asking where he's going. He's going to do some fencing tournament. And he's like, oh, yeah, like they say in fencing. What's the point? I'm like, is this how grating this is? And the answer is yes. This guy, by the way, Toby Stevens, I don't think this role did him any favors. So he gets in the limo to leave.
Wait,
and
before we move on, may I discuss with you Toby Stevens?
Yeah.
He plays James Bond. He
Yes,
has been
in the audio
doing
dramas.
In the audio dramas. And so I appreciate the fact, and also it is sort of a trope of James Bond movies where the villain sort of emulates the traits of Bond, or even the producers say what we were trying to do here is make the mirror image of Bond. Like it comes up with Alec Trevelyan or even with Sanchez from License to Kill. Like it is something that they do from time to time. And to have a villain outright say it, you know who the guy who should kick your ass is? You. I became you, and I'm going to destroy you. And I think
But other movies do it a lot better than this.
Oh, for sure. No argument.
So, strangely, Bond is standing amongst this media blitz, just kind of standing there with his hand in his pockets. He watches this, and he then follows this guy down to the club, the fencing club, and he goes in there, and we have a gratuitous cameo by Madonna, who's like the sword master there, and he's telling her that... Madonna, and we see that Gustav Graves is having a sword fight with Miranda Frost, and Bond asks, "Oh, is that?" And Madonna's like, "Oh, yes, she was so great at the Sydney Olympics, which would be 2 years before the events of this film." And she's like, "Oh, she deserved the win after the guy who actually won overdosed on steroids and got disqualified." And she's like, "Oh, but she's deserved it. She's so good." And it's like, yeah, okay. So Bond comes forward to greet Gustav Graves at the end of this match, and they shake hands, and he's like, and Graves is like, "Have we met before?" And it's like, no. So they decide, it's like, friendly match, will you? And so they play this fencing match with their helmets on. Bond wins very quickly and easily. And he's like, Bond's like, "Oh, you want to continue?" And Graves is like, "Of course I want to bloody continue." Like a spoiled, like, prep school boy. And then he's like, "Well, we'll set it at, the first blood drawn on the torso." And I'm like, I still don't, I mean, I get, obviously, since Gustav Graves knows who Bond is because of who he really is. But Bond doesn't really know anything about him yet, except he might be involved in some conflict time, I think. So there's really no reason for this next
person.
Yeah, there's no reason for this to become as insane as it does. So they start their sword fight again.
But this is the kind of thing. It's like when we talk about our rankings of the different James Bond movies, it makes sense in Moonraker for the entire sword fight that happens. Like that makes sense. This movie is just like, excuse me, there's a giant sword fight going on. And everyone in the world of James Bond is like, we'll allow it. It's James
so they get
Bond's
in this
world.
In this completely insane sword fight where they're trashing everything in this like museum. They end up going outside and cutting, and eventually Bond wins this fight too, slashing him across the chest. And finally Miranda intervenes to put a stop to it, saying, "That is enough." And of course, this whole scene was full of dumb innuendos. Like, oh, Bond's like, "Oh, I think I get the tip. I have my tip up the sword." Little things like that. And it's like, okay, they're not things which, again, 14 or 13-year-olds would think, "Ooh, really racy," but no.
So the thing is that they were employing the titillation of the 1960s, what would shock you, with humor that was really more aimed towards, like, even if it's
funny because this was also a nod to Goldfinger, because when they set the wager for this fight, Bond showed him the conflict diamonds, or the Graves and diamonds, and so it's like, oh, I'll match, and like Goldfinger is like, oh, I'll match whatever, I'll match the value for the,
I think you've hit the nail, like, and it's also something that I've felt for a long time, but I think that we ultimately agree that this is a greatest hits album. Keep going. So anyway,
Yeah, so they destroy
Bond
this
draws
place.
first blood from the torso from Graves.
Yeah, he draws the first blood, and Miranda Frost finally puts a stop to it, and they end up getting cleaned up, and they come downstairs into the main lobby, and Gustav is like, he's cutting Bond the check, and he's like, "Oh, are you free this weekend? I'm gonna have a presentation for Icarus in Iceland. Would you like to come?" And Bond's like, "I don't know." And then without waiting for Bond's response, Graves just turns to Miranda. He's like, "Make the arrangements, will you?" And she's like, "Yes, once I've squared things away with the club." And he's like, "What would I do without you?" And he just walks away. And then Bond says, "Oh, and will I be seeing you in Iceland, Miss Frost, and have the pleasure of your company there?" And she's like, "That, Mr. Bond, is a pleasure you will never have." And she walks away. And then we have this cameo by a show jumper guy, a former equestrian, and he's the concierge in the dreadlocks, and he shows up and he's like, and he looks around at the destruction, and he's like, "Place needed to be remodeled anyway, but this just came for you, Mr. Command." And he calls him Commander Bond, which is nice. And he gives him this package. Bond opens it, and there's a super medieval-looking key in it. And we cut to Bond walking south on Westminster Bridge. And he gets up to, I guess at the end of the bridge, there's like these concrete like posts or whatever, and there's a door. And he goes into this abandoned London Tube tunnel section where he's greeted by M, and Bond's like, "Oh, I forgot this place existed." And she's kind of unhappy with him, and she's like, what have you got on Graves?" And Bond's kind of indignant at this, that first you're trying to lock me up. You wanted me to stay in Korea and die. You were overruled for it. You then didn't have any sympathies to the fact that I told you that I got ratted out by somebody else, that you're the one with the leak. You were going to dump me off in some detention center in the Falklands for debriefing. And now you're come crawling back to me asking. And she's like, "What, you looking for an apology?" And he just kind of brushes it off. And they walk into this other room where you see this cabinet of like all sorts of things like knives and binoculars or whatever. And she tells him that she has an agent who's looked into Gustav Graves. And they're like, "Well, what do we know?" Bond's like, "Well, what do we know?" And she's like, "Born in Argentina, worked in his father's diamond mines. He ended up inheriting his fortune, discovers a mine in Iceland, donates half of its value to charity." And it's like this guy's whole life story just came on the public scene barely a year ago. And, M is kind of suspicious about this, and Bond shows her the conflict diamonds. And M is like, "Okay, you can go with him to Iceland," because he tells her that, about the whole Iceland deal. And then M leaves him. And Bond rounds a corner, and he's greeted by Q. And Q takes him into the side room where we have a cameo from all sorts of gadgets from the previous Bond films. We have the attaché case. Yes, we have the attaché case. We have Rosa Kleb's shoe. We have the alligator submarine thing from Octopussy. The
jetpack.
The jetpack from Thunderball. The little robot camera from View to a Kill.
Yeah.
All sorts of things in here, which is really cool. And this kind of gave rise to the fan theory that, oh, well, James Bond must be a code name if they're trying to say that all these missions were canon, because there's no way he'd still be this young. I don't think that's what they were saying. I think it's just like a fun little cameo, just to, tip of the hat to the fans, just for fun.
Yeah.
And then Q debuts what I think is one of the coolest gadgets in the series, where he puts on this ring and it unleashes this high frequency pulse, which just shatters this glass. I'm like, that is awesome. And no matter how, and you just adjust the band on the ring depending on how high the frequency pitch is for how thick the glass might be. So I thought that was pretty cool.
No, it's a really cool gadget, and he uses it twice.
Yes, and so
it's a very strange gadget, because usually James Bond doesn't use Q's gadget more than once.
Yes, and then Q takes him into this side room where he's like, "Presenting your new ride," and he clicks a button, and coming out of the dark on the train track is this empty tram. And Bond's like, "Oh, you've really outdone yourself this time, Q." And Q takes a step on it, and immediately you see the distortion, showing that this wouldn't work anyway. And he's like, "The Aston Martin V12 Vanquish, we like to call it the Vanish." And he clicks a button, and it pixelates to life where you could see it, and Bond is genuinely impressed. He's like, "Oh, very good." And they even had the Goldfinger line where when he sees the invisible thing, he's like, "You're joking about your..." He's like, "I never joke. Like my predecessor before, I never joke about, because they have to fit that in there." So when the car illuminates, Q's like, "Oh, it has a bunch of microscopic cameras on both sides which project the image that it sees onto a milk screen on the opposite side of the car." And I'm like, "No, that doesn't work, because we've actually tested that type of technology and it really doesn't work." And this is something that most people...
The James Bond movie was a documentary.
Right, but I'm saying is that it's getting to the point, like you mentioned, almost to superhero levels at this point. Like,
Yeah.
it's a bit much, and this is a deal breaker for a lot of people.
But again, I'm still looking at it through like rose tinted glasses. I'm like, I want to like this, but it just piles up. And if you poke holes in it, I will absolutely tell you that I hate it. But as long as I don't have to think about it too much, I think I love this movie. Keep going.
All right, so he's like, okay, so Bond's got the vanish, and Q gives him the instruction manual. It's like, oh, I'm sure you'll shoot through this in just a few days or whatever, Bond. And Bond just picks it up and throws it in the air, and the automatic shotguns on the car just blast it smithereens. And he's like, just took a few seconds, Q. And Q's just indignant about this. So then we cut back to MI6 in M's office, where we see Miranda Frost is actually an MI6 agent, and she's giving her, M asks her for assessment of Bond, and she says all the things that, basically the same version of what M told Bond in GoldenEye. He's sexist, misogynist, blah, blah, blah. He's a blunt instrument, not really good for anything. And you can detect a hint of a smile from M. She's kind of sick in this way, where she really loves hearing this type of stuff. And she asks, and she says, well, you've been on the Gustav Graves case for a couple of years now, which is I think she says a couple of years. I'm fairly certain she said that, which would be a blooper, because this movie's 2002. And like she told Bond, in the 14 months you were in prison, the world changed, referring to 9/11. So, and she was at the 2000 Olympics, which of course is tied into Graves later. But Gustav Graves, as we know, didn't get quote unquote born until late 2001, early 2002, once all the DNA therapy shit. So that's kind of a complete blooper that the timeline of that doesn't make any sense at all. And she's like, well, you've been on this case for 2 years and you haven't really found anything. She's like, well, Gustav Graves, what can I say? He's squeaky clean. And M talks about how and I'm thinking, okay, M, this is a red flag, because look all the shit that Bond came up with in the course of like a day, one afternoon, and you've had an agent who you clearly covet who's been on this case for 2 years and she hasn't found anything. And then there's a moment where M congratulates her about how she's resisted the advances of other coworkers, and I'm like, time out. You're M, you're female. The female M is aware that there's apparently a lot of untoward activities going on in the workplace, which would be not sanctioned, which is the whole reason why Bond and Moneypenny can't have a relationship. So you're aware that that a bunch of men in your employ are coming on to your female agents, and you're not doing anything about it. You're just kind of accepting it. And not a good look, M. It even felt weird in 2002 that, because M strikes me as like a no bullshit type person who wouldn't tolerate that type of insubordination.
Never mind. I'll ask you later. Keep going.
Yeah, I didn't think she would tolerate that type of insubordination in the workplace, but whatever. So the point is, she should have been suspicious as to why this favorite agent who's been on this case for 2 years doesn't know shit, and Bond's been on it for like half a day, and he's already got a significant lead. So we then cut to another interesting scene where Bond's back in his office at MI6. He's cleaning out his gun, and then you hear two guys get shot outside. And Bond goes outside the door, and what follows is very reminiscent to one of the early levels in the video game The World Is Not Enough, where the spirit
I told you about the video gaming of these movies.
Right, but in the spirit of, video games always exaggerating things. Instead of the cigar girl just setting off the bomb, we have a whole SWAT team of guys in that level who storm the building, and you have to move through and save them all. Seems they took direct inspiration from that and just have that be the sequence. The SWAT guys showing up, and Bond's killing all of them. He meets Robinson in one of the halls. They go into M's office. Robinson's immediately killed, and Bond takes out the goons. He gives M a flesh wound at the expense of killing this bad guy, who suddenly goes into like slow motion as he's falling back, and then Q magically walks through the wall, and we realize this is a VR session, and it cuts out of it, and Bond is back in that underground facility.
But may I interrupt you? I have been saying this entire run how much GoldenEye influenced the public perception of James Bond. And I think that scene specifically, these VR glasses that are used for a training exercise and explicit use of pornography, those two instances, that is a direct response to the video game community saying, okay, like that's how I interpret it.
That's probably true. So
great, moving on.
Yeah, so then so they had this VR scene, which doesn't really mean much, and so Bond then takes off to Iceland with his V12 Vanquish, and he's beautiful shots of him driving along the countryside.
And again, rack zooms and things.
Yes, a lot of rack zooms and speed. I'm like, what is that he doing here? And the palace itself looks really cool on the outside. Bond's pulling up to park, and you see this like a red rocket for setting land speed records, like on ice flakes, and you see it zoom by, and Gustav Graves gets out, and he comments about how he's trying to emulate Donald Campbell, who's set a lot of land speed and water speed records doing stuff like that. Got killed doing it too. And Bond points that out to him, and he's like, oh, so what? You do it to live, not to die, or some dumb comment like that. And Graves saying these dumb puns and stuff as is his nature. He leaves Bond in the entrance of the Ice Palace with Miranda Frost, and he's like, oh, Miranda, they have a little chit-chat, and he ends up ditching her at the bar where he sees Jinx again. And they have a bunch of non-innuendos where she talks about, oh, yeah, I've got the thrust of it, and, that kind of thing. And
well, yeah, but why do you call them non-innuendos? Why are they non-innuendos?
Well, because usually an innuendo is clever. It's not that on the nose.
Okay, I understand.
Like otherwise it's just a cheap. It's like you're literally saying, like, the word thrust isn't even an innuendo. We know exactly what innuendo would be using some other clever substitute. I feel
it's kind of like when Madonna said, I don't like cockfights. It's like, right. Well, that's not clever. You're just actually never mind. Get out of the movie, Madonna.
Right. So Bond's talking with the Jinx, and she's like, oh, I'm here, take whatever. And that night they get to see the presentation. And the Icarus presentation is basically Gustav Graves has this satellite encrusted with diamonds, just like the one from Diamonds Are Forever. And he talks about how he can catch the reflection from the sun to create this giant laser or whatever, or not laser, but he says he can reflect the power of the sun to bring food to places that don't really have it by bringing more sunlight so they can grow more crops and stuff like that. It makes it sound like a big humanitarian thing. And in typical Bond villain fashion, he's not very good at giving this type of public speech. And Bond and Jinx are watching him being polite. Meanwhile, we see the camera cuts away to show this hooded figure who looks a bit more like dressed in this big, overly huge rain jacket showing up. And it's like, ooh, I wonder who that could be, because we know it's going to be Zhao. And so he shows up. Yes.
Diamond face.
After the proceedings, Bond decides to go snoop around. And he nearly gets caught because he accidentally sets off the alarm while Zhao has greeted Gustav Graves back inside the greenhouse, which is attached outside this ice palace. And he's talking to him in Korean, and he's looking at he's like, who did that to your face? And he's like, oh, Bond did it. And he's asking, Zhao's asking Graves if he's feeling the effects. And he's like, yeah, I can't sleep. The insomnia is permanent, and the little hour under the mask is all I need to stay sane. And he says, it's crazy. The crazy thing about Bond, he's like, I sat this close to his face, and he still didn't know who I was. And so they're kind of having a little laugh about that when the alarms go off. And they immediately get their goons to go investigate. And it seems like Bond's about to be caught. But for some reason, Miranda Frost decides to intervene and save him. And they go back to Bond's room. They make love. And we find out later it's just because she wanted to, disarm his gun. But it's like, you didn't really need to do that because he was about to be captured. And while they're making love, she asks him how much he knows about, what really happened in North Korea, James? And he's like, what? I was betrayed. That's it. So I don't know if she was trying to gauge how much he knew about who the traitor might be at that point, and maybe that's why she did it, because she thought maybe he wouldn't crack under torture. Like, he didn't crack under torture before, so maybe he'll crack under,
seduction.
Yes, seduction, and maybe that's why she did it. I guess that might be it. I talking out loud, I just answered my own question.
And that's what this entire show is about. Welcome to Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns.
Yes.
Where we explore why we think Die Another Day is not that bad.
And so, meanwhile,
they're in better than Octopussy.
Jinx goes, cuts out a hole in the ceiling of the greenhouse, and she rappels in. She's snooping around, and she comes upon Zhao, who's sitting under the mask again inside the main office chamber in there. She's about to lift it up and point the gun at him when Gustav Graves gets her with this very Emperor Palpatine-looking, like, glove device that electrifies her, like Sith lightning. And it's like, oh, geez, what have we done now? And then she wakes up strapped to the hydraulic system of these lasers, because apparently this whole presentation is supposed to be occurring at the diamond mine. They use lasers to get the diamonds out and cut the diamonds.
Makes
And
sense.
Zhao is in there, and you have this another slow-mo shot as he's walking around in front of the camera with his jacket kind of billowing randomly. And yeah,
So you said
I
that
forgot
they
to
were
mention
trying
this.
to get John Woo to do this?
They did, and they couldn't. So I guess they're just emulating what they thought he would have done.
You know what? If we can't get John Woo, let's just rip him off.
Yeah. No, I forgot to mention they also got Lawrence Mohore to play a henchman, Mr. Kill.
Well, and he's great.
He's really cool.
And Mr. Kill is also, for our Australian fans, which I'm sure we have at least one. He was in the Australian Gladiators. You know, American Gladiators? Well, they have an Australian version, and
Yes.
apparently he was one of them.
He also played Lurtz in the Fellowship of the Ring. He was the Witch King in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and he was Gothmog, the leader of the orc leader of the Battle of Minas Tirith. So he got quite a few roles there. So
I don't like wizards.
His role in this movie is a little wasted. He's just kind of there, like when he tells Bond when Bond first arrived, he's like, "Hello, I am Mr. Kill," and he's like, and Bond's like, "No, that's a name to die for." It's like, oh jeez. So Mr. Kill is standing here with the lasers, and Zhao is interrogating Jinx, and she has this horrible dialogue about how, oh, you know, my mama sent me, and she told me that she's really disappointed in you. And Zhao's using the Palpatine like glove to electrify her, and it's like, oh, this is bad. And he tells her a secret. He's like, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. This mine is fake, but the lasers are real. And he tells Mr. Kill to, kill her, and hands him a pistol, and he's like, I'll use the laser. And Zhao's like, okay, well, don't make a mess. And Zhao leaves. And even though it should have taken a grand total of like a second to kill her with a laser, quite a lot of time passes from when, Bond leaves Miranda Frost in bed, takes his gun, sneaks into the greenhouse, sees what's going on in there. He finds her in distress, and I guess Mr. Kill left the room for something for a brief moment. He shows back up, and the laser's burning alongside, coming up towards her. Again, another Goldfinger reference. Instead of the laser splitting her in half, it's going to come towards her head. And Mr. Kill shows up. There's a fight, and they accidentally turn all the lasers on, and they're trying to duck out of the way. We have some really weird, like sped up film shots, which are kind of awkward. And eventually, Mr. Kill gets Bond in like a chokehold against the wall, and Jinx ends up getting a hold of the little device that you could use to click on the lasers, and she moves the little joystick to position the laser right behind Mr. Kill's head, turns it on, and it beams through his brain and out his face, and he's dead. And then Bond goes over there and cuts her loose. And before he does, of course, he's like, okay, now you're going to tell me who you really are and what you're doing here. I can't even remember what excuse she gave him the first time for her cover reason for being for even being at this ice palace. But he's like, what are you, CIA? And she's like, NSA, we're on the same side. Now cut me loose. He's like, yeah, okay. So he cuts her loose.
The least convincing performance I have ever seen Halle Berry. Like Pierce Brosnan is bringing his A game, and he's like, who are you? CIA? And she's like, NSA. It's like, it's the worst. And I like Halle Berry, but she's just awful in this movie.
Well, so was Pierce, so it ain't saying much. They're both together. Now, his dialogue is atrocious, and it brings him down.
No, but his performance is actually still James Bond. It's like you can still accept terrible when you're, the star of the movie. But when you are the co-star, it's just like, oh, how do you say this? Oh, she had just won an Oscar, and it's just, wow. Anyway, moving on.
I think she won the Oscar the next year. I can't remember when that movie came out that she won it for. I thought it was 2002, maybe not. So anyway,
she may have filmed this before she actually won, but it was released after she won.
So he told so she's like, I gotta go notify, for backup reinforcements, tell them what's going on here. And even though they don't really know what the end game is, and Bond says, well, how did you get caught? She's like, well, I snuck up on Zhao using that mask that he must have brought with him from the clinic. And Bond's like, no, because we destroyed that one in the clinic. It was already here because there's another North Korean here. And she's like, huh? And he's like, go fine, go notify her back. And as she's leaving, he's like, wait, go tell Miranda Frost she's MI6. And he's like, okay. So Bond goes back upstairs into the main office in the greenhouse. He's sitting in the chair, and Gustav Graves comes in, and Bond just knocks down the tray, and this gun pointed at him, and he's like, so you live to die another day. And they have another big dramatic music beat. And Graves is like, I was beginning to wondering when you were going to figure it out. And Bond asks him about the treatments.
I thought it was funny when they actually did the montage, like a dance number, much like Mamma Mia. And they do a Die Another Day. And it's just Bond and Mr. Kill. And they sing to the title song. It was great. During the lasers.
What are you talking about?
I'm just babbling. Moving on.
Yeah, because that doesn't happen here. So he says, yeah, it's like he popped. So let me start over again. So yeah, so Gustav Graves comes in back to his office. Bond knocks down the tray with his gun. He's like, so you live to die another day. And Graves is like, oh, so you finally figured it out, have you? And being all dainty like that. And Bond's asking him about the treatments and whether or not it was painful. And he's like, oh, yes, you have no idea. And Bond's like, oh, that's really good. But then Zhao shows up, and Miranda Frost comes in, and Frost comes in first, and she puts the gun to Graves. And Bond's all satisfied, like, aha, we got you type of thing. And he's like, did you ever find out who betrayed you in North Korea? And Bond is really slow on this. He's like basically just told him who did it. And Bond's like, oh, in good time. And Graves like, you never thought about looking in your own organization. And she turns the gun on him. And Bond is like really upset. He turns to fire. He pulls the trigger. And she's like, oh, and of course there's no bullets. And she's like, oh, so good of you to bring your gun to bed, James. And Graves is like, yeah, when I organized for the athlete, the rightful winner to die in the overdose, I just knew I had to have her, you know, her sensibility and her sex and all this kind of stuff. And then Zhao walks in and greets Bond, and Bond's like, I always liked your sparkling personality. And Zhao just, you know, punches him in the gut. And then they mention that they've got Jinx, and, you know, Bond's kind of worried about that. He's lying on the ground now. Yeah, and he's lying on the ground now in the the greenhouse office still, and they're pulling the guns out and they're about to finish him off. And he uses Q's gadget, the high frequency pulse, to shatter all the glass that they're standing on. He takes off into the forest, or into the greenhouse forest, to get away.
Yeah.
And Graves is like, okay, you got to deal with this. And but
which is also one of those other things where it's like everyone shoots at him. And then he keeps running, and then and no one hits him. But then someone says, "Don't shoot at him, because you'll blow up the pressurized containers." And it's like, do you know how many people have been shooting him at it already? Like, it's too late. It's too late. You would be blowed up.
There was something else that was funny I forgot to mention. So the way that Bond got into the greenhouse to begin with was he cut a hole with his Q watch in the ice. He swam through ice cold frozen lake.
Totes.
And he came up through another hole in the hot spring. But he didn't have to go through any other barrier. I'm like, wait a minute. How did you get from swimming under the cold ice of the lake to ending up in this hot spring?
Well, because heat rises. Heat rises.
Yeah, well, it's a completely different water source. But that was a little weird. Anyway, so Bond takes off, and Graves is like, okay, we got to get out of here. And they get on their plane, and he brings his sports cars, and he brings what's his name? The Vladimir, who's like his racing technician or whatever. And they get his Russian racing technician, and they're about to leave. Yes, and Zhao is outside looking around trying to find Bond, and Bond manages to get over to his invisible car. Well, and he's like, where's Bond? Find it. And then he starts driving along, but of course the fact that this invisible car doesn't entirely work because the distortion kind of gives it away. And Zhao jumps into his Jaguar. And this is a scene I think we've needed to see for a long time. Gadget car versus gadget car. And so there's no logic as to why this car is souped up with all these gadgets. It just is. And he gets into the car. And that was actually a funny callback, too, because in the pre-title sequence, Bond mentions to, while he's still undercover as Mr. Van Beer, he mentioned to Colonel Moon that, I would have, like, what did you major in Oxford? Because he said Colonel Moon said he got some education there. He's like, Western hypocrisy. And Vanderveer's like, I never would have guessed it with your sports car collection, all these Western sports cars. And so they're loading him onto the plane, of course, but not Zhao, who's got the souped up shit. And he puts on the infrared goggles. He sees Bond's car. He starts chasing him, and they go out for this awesome car chase on the ice. And the funny thing is that they're leaving Zhao behind because the cargo plane is taking off, and I don't know, maybe they intended to come back and get him later. So they shoot all sorts of gadgets. One of the neat ones is Bond gets flipped upside down and he uses the ejector seat to flip the car back over, which is kind of neat.
My favorite as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. He eventually gets back into the ice palace because the way they're going to kill Jinx is she's locked in her room and they're going to melt the palace with the Icarus laser. And they've already in the process of doing this by the time Bond drives the Vanquish back into the building, and Zhao follows, and Bond drives up to the second level. He parks the car perpendicular to the main road, the whole drive, and
I feel like you skipped over the parasailing a tsunami.
No, that happens afterwards, I think, doesn't it?
Okay, keep going.
Yeah, because he hasn't killed Zhao yet.
And
so,
he parasails the tsunami after killing Zhao?
I think so, because doesn't he take the
Vanquish?
Because after the parasailing sequence is over, they think he's dead, don't they? When does the parasailing sequence start? I just watched this an hour ago and I can't remember how it started.
Well, because it's a fucking jumble of gibberish, yo.
Well, he stole that's right. So for some reason he steals the rocket car first. He takes off across the ice. Icarus starts burning the laser to chase him. He goes off a cliff into the water, uses some of the plates on that thing to do the sky surfing thing through the icebergs and all the water as it's melted. This is pure CGI. It's really bad. Right. It's like, again, you opened this movie with a legit surfing sequence, and now you're doing CGI surfing. You can't do that. And it looks cartoonishly absurd. And at one point, I guess Graves just assumes that he dies because Bond gets out of it by just surfing up back onto the ledge. He ditches it, and I guess he goes for the car then, and that's when the car chase started. Because I thought Zhao ran outside and they started the car chase first, but whatever. So they take the car, and they're fighting the thing with Zhao. They go into the building in the Ice Palace, and like I said, he drives up the main drive, parks the car perpendicular to the roadway, and Zhao unloads this battering ram out of the front radiator. No way this battering ram can be there, given it's going right through where the engine and radiator needs to be. And then Zhao smiles, he revs the engine, and then Bond turns the car invisible again. And Zhao panics, and rather than hit the brakes, he just drives right through the wall, and his car tips sideways. Again, a slow motion shot as he crashes into the floor of the palace into the lake. And Bond switches the car's visibility back on, and we see that he's on the wall thanks to the traction. He has he's got steel pegs for the traction in the tires. Right. He then drives down below, pulls out his pistol, fires at the tow rope hanging, holding one of the diamond chandeliers. And Zhao, who's just swum up from the water, instead of just getting out of the way, he just stands there looking at it, screaming, and the diamonds hit him, and they kill him. Bond then crashes the car to Jinx's room. It crashes, all the water ships pouring out. She falls on the windshield of the car. He then uses the frequency ring again to break the front windshield to get her in there. Drives her outside over to the greenhouse and jumps into one of the hot springs to bring her back. And she's like, "What took you so long?"
Well, no, there's also a little bit there is exposition for the audience to understand what's going on, where it's like Pierce Brosnan is vigorously rubbing Halle Berry. And it's like, oh no, the cold kept you alive. The cold, because they show during the whole car chase thing going on that she is clearly drowned. And and it's like he does the whole thing. He does CPR, and then he's like, oh no, we're in a hot spring. The cold kept you alive. And once again, it's just one of these things. I think Pierce Brosnan.
Okay, so the laser thing did happen before because Graves apparently some of the North Korean generals were there, and he wanted to demonstrate the real reason he made Icarus, and that's why he did that. And they're already departing on the plane while they're burning down the palace, and that's when he killed Zhao. And so he's got her, and she's fine.
The palace.
So then we cut to a military base at the DMZ where we have Falco and M, and there's a joint mission that's been approved in which Bond and Jinx are going to sneak onto the plane at this runway. And so they easily do that. Plane takes off. You got the sports cars in there. And that's funny because as the plane was actually taking off from Iceland, there was also this really terrible edit. where you're in the middle of the dramatic scene of Bond trying to find Jinx and save her, and they cut to this really flat moment where Graves is on the plane and he tells Vladimir, he's like, have you ever heard of the word ergonomics? This thing is still a suitcase. Fix it, will you? And like, why are you intercutting a big action scene and racing to save the girl with this random clip that doesn't belong? It's a bad editing, even. So anyway,
and it's even worse when he shows up with the Iron Man suit, and I'm like, you had 12 minutes. How did you get this together?
Well, no, because by then they'd already gone to North Korea.
Oh, well then.
Remember, because they get so Bond and Jinx get onto the runway by cutting through the chain link fence. They sneak aboard through the landing gear, and we have, as the plane's going airborne, General Moon is brought inside the plane and to meet these generals. And he's kind of confused because he doesn't know why they're here, and he sees Graves, who's got the whole Iron Man suit on now with the whole Palpatine glove with it, and he speaks Korean to him, and General Moon's like, and what he says is that I know you, I'm glad to see you again. He's like, I don't know you. And he says it in English, surprisingly. He doesn't seem perplexed by this guy speaking to him in Korean. And he says, of all the things you taught me, you once taught me a good general never seeks out battle until the victory is already won, with the father finishing the sentence. And then he says, oh, Father, we're finally going to achieve our dream. And General Moon is just flabbergasted by this. And he looks at this bronze bust of his son. And then he looks at Graves caressing the side of his face, and he's like totally turned off by it. Like, you monster, what have you done? And so Graves just decides to, so indignant by this, he just kills his father with the electric, the Palpatine weapon, as I call it, the Sith lightning. Bond sees this happen. He's like, oh, okay. So he goes in, and the guards see him, and he fires a gun, and that shatters the glass. Because for some reason on this airplane, they're not up in like a cockpit. They're like in the whole lower portion of the nose cone is like all glass, so you can see everywhere. And he fires the gun. Again, a Goldfinger reference. Don't fire a gun in an airplane, but he does. And immediately, Vladimir, the racing guy, who I forgot to mention when Bond was racing across the ice in the rocket car, Vladimir kind of siphons up beside Graves. He's like, hey, boss, you beat your time. And he's like really excited about it. I thought that was funny. And so he gets sucked out the window immediately. All the Korean generals get sucked out. General Moon's body gets sucked out. Then Bond and Graves get in this fight where they're desperately trying to hang on, prevent going anywhere. Meanwhile, Jinx has made her way to the cockpit, and she's trying to take control of the plane. And Miranda Frost comes in, and for no apparent reason, she's not wearing a shirt. She's wearing like her training, like a bra with some special type of sports bra or whatever, with her like long pants or whatever. And she's really just grating in the scene. She puts her sword up to Jinx's throat. She's like, turn on the autopilot. That's it. Good girl. I'm like, I cannot stand this kid. This is just too obnoxious. And eventually, rather than just killing her like she should, Jinx gets in a fight with her. Yeah.
I really feel like they tried to make Miranda Frost into Mayday.
How so?
And ultimately,
you mean like a Mayday Zorn type relationship between her and Graves?
Yes. And also
okay, yeah, I can see
that she would also be an intimidating figure as well because of her achievements in the realm of fencing. But like, I just think, look, when she shows up with a sword, it's like, oh no, she's got her A game now.
Right, and that's totally, and there's no payoff to that either.
No.
So meanwhile, while Jinx and her are fighting, at one point, she ends up stabbing her. She's like, "Eat this, bitch," and like stabs her in the stomach through this book.
Art of War by Sun Tzu.
Yeah, and it feels so bizarre that this is the character who Bond has been looking for. Really, he should have been the one to kill her, but no. He's up front playing Star Wars with Graves, and I can't emphasize enough how ridiculous this next bit is. Okay. So Graves has knocked the wind out of Bond. Bond's lying on the ground, not holding on to anything. Graves is standing there, and he's like, oh, look, parachutes for the both of us. And he throws one out, and he's like, oops, not anymore. He puts it on, and he sits down. He's like, you see, Mr. Bond, you can't kill my dreams, but my dreams can kill you. And then Bond's like,
that was really good.
Yeah, and he's like, time to fight. So Bond presses pulls the parachute cord, and yes. he gets sucked out the window or sucked out through the open, blasting in the plane, and he's grabbing onto the side, and you see the immense pressure the air pressure, the wind pressure of being sucked out. There's no way Bond would just be lying there on the ground without getting sucked out like everybody else did the second the window got snapped. Same with Gustav, how he was just standing there talking to him. Oh, you can't kill my parachutes. Like, you saw what happened to everybody else the minute the window got shattered. People from all the way in the back of the plane just got sucked right out. And it's like, there's no way you would be. I mean, it doesn't look like the plane is low enough in altitude for this wouldn't be an issue. Plus, you see how violently Graves is trying to hang on outside. And
We've said
Bond
it
is now
before,
just,
and we'll say it again, Kat. Because movie.
yes, the plot demanded it. So he's hanging on, and Bond's like, sit tight, and he presses the Palpatine button again, electrifying Graves because he's hanging onto the metal hull of the plane. He's electrified, and eventually he lets go because he can't handle it anymore. And he gets sucked into the engine. And I forgot to mention, this whole time, the villain's plan, I guess I should have mentioned that, was that he was going to use the Icarus laser to burn away the entire 38th parallel. And his father had argued against it. He's like, but the Americans will send nuclear warheads. He's like, well, Icarus will just swat them from the sky.
From the sky.
And one of the generals nodded, like, yeah. And it's like, so you're just going to fly in this airplane forever and wear this Palpatine thing forever? I mean, it's so bad.
Oh, you know what? I never realized how Death Star it was.
Yes, and in fact, speaking of Death Star, the whole time that Bond and Falco and M and Robinson are at the military base, which there's no reason for them to really be at this base. They could just be at their respective headquarters and video chatting this. But they're there, and they're seeing the laser just burning, coming closer and closer, just annihilating the 38th parallel, trying to heighten the tension that they're all about to die. And right when Graves gets sucked into the engine of the airplane, or into the turbine, I should say, and just killed, that destroys the device. The laser shuts down, and M smiles smugly. She knows that, oh, it had to be Bond. It couldn't be Jinx, you know? And Falco's just kind of, he smokes his cigarette because he'd been insulting towards Bond, because that's another thing. Falco was actually there at the prisoner exchange, and he sees Bond walk back. He's like, huh, you look at him like he's some kind of hero, you know? And it's like, so you're kind of getting the sense that this Falco guy, it's like, I get it. He's American, so they have to throw him under the bus or whatever. So meanwhile, Bond goes back into the belly of the plane, and he finds Miranda dead, and he gives a very weird reaction. Rather than, say, being upset that he didn't get the chance to kill her, he kind of kneels down and does this almost like this mournful look, similar to the one he gave Elektra after he shot her. And it's like, no, dude, you should be happy the bitch is dead, and if anything, maybe upset that you didn't get to kill her yourself. But he's rubbing his mouth.
Oh, like, no, but it's... And, okay, so, but this is a thing, aside from GoldenEye, this is a thing where Pierce Brosnan absolutely has to have a mourning scene.
But for the villain,
over a woman that he's been semi-intimate with, or very intimate with when it comes to Paris Garver. But I don't get it. And when I watched this again, when I watched Die Another Day again, I was like, oh, don't you go hover over that dead body, that's girl. And he does. Yeah. He totally does. And it's weird. It's weird.
It's very weird. So, and then he looks at Jinx just sitting there, and she's like, looks like we're going down together. So they run into the back of the plane. He tells Jinx to open the rear doors. She does. And in a scene which is competing and possibly inspired a lot of the stunts in the Fast and the Furious franchise, this flaming plane crashing out of the sky, Bond hits this switch, and it starts, pushing everything out of the back. And the sports cars fall out, and Bond and Jinx get in the helicopter. It falls out. They're falling through the sky, getting hit by the debris from the airplane. The two sports cars end up embedded in this marshland in this lake. And at the very last second, Bond manages, as they're falling, he manages to get the engine, the rotors spinning. And as they're falling, even Jinx is like, well, at least we're going to die. She's like, I told you I was a Jinx, but at least we're going to die rich, because all the diamonds are in there. And the rotors move at the last second. Bond evens out the chopper. They take off. And it's like, okay. We then cut back to MI6, where Bond comes in to greet Moneypenny. And it's kind of this weird moment. It starts sensual, and they start having outright sex and making out on the desk. And then all of a sudden, you hear Q's voice, and Moneypenny perks up, and we see that she's doing the virtual reality thing. And he's like, she's like, oh, I was just testing it out. As she's quickly buttoning up her shirt. And Q was like, yeah, it does take a few getting used to, doesn't it? And then Q kind of pauses and looks up and is like, hey, wait a minute, So then we cut back to the coast, the Korean coast, I guess, and Bond and Jinx have landed the helicopter at this cliffside bungalow, and he's like, "Oh, she's don't take it out just yet. Leave it in a little bit longer." It's like again into what shit, and we see that they've covered themselves in all of the diamonds, and Bond's like, "Oh, we're gonna have to return these soon." She's like, "Oh, we're still the good guys," and he's like, "Oh, are you trying to be bad?" She's like, "Oh, I'm so good," and he's like, "Even when you're bad," I was like, "Oh my god, this dialogue is so bad," and then he starts kissing her, and that's the end of Die Another Day. And the unceremonious end of the Brosnan era to a nightclub remix of Die Another Day by Madonna. And I think they went way
that's
overboard.
It's over.
I think they went way overboard with trying to appease the kids with all these innuendos, trying to look cool, all the CGI and shit. It's just trying to homage as many Bond films as it can. I think it's a shame because in the beginning I was actually invested in the story. Bond has been betrayed by somebody who's an insider, and he has to do a political thing where, okay, I can tell that M is really pissed off that Zhao was traded. You could tell the CIA was pissed off that Zhao got traded as well, and he's got to stop this guy, as well as finding out who the culprit is. That could have been a good movie. Like, don't bring back Colonel Moon. Let him be dead. Let Bond go on a genuine espionage adventure. Don't do the DNA clinic and shit. Find out what's going on and who the insider is. Have a really fun espionage type story, like a throwback to From Russia with Love or something. Instead, it just became what it became, which is just this over the top special effects extravaganza with cheesy dialogue that you find in early cutscenes of video games from the 90s, and just really it's funny that it actually had a mixed reception upon release. It made north of $430 million, which is the most, or somewhere around there. So it was the most successful Bond film at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But the reviews, I guess the rose-colored glasses came off pretty early because within 16 months or so, they decided that they weren't going to stick with Pierce anymore. But yeah, so the timeline doesn't work because it's like, okay, if this movie's 2002, Bond was in prison for 14 months, and it was only at the start of that stint that Colonel Moon died, and Gustav Graves is going to start being born. So the fact that she even was affiliated with him, that Miranda Frost was affiliated with him at the 2000 Sydney Olympics, just doesn't, the math there just doesn't work. The fact that M was too dim to wonder why, Bond can find out all this in a day and she can't find out shit, doesn't work. The absurdities, yeah, they're leaning into Diamonds Are Forever and Moonraker a bit too much. And so, I don't know, this whole movie's a mess, and I think maybe that's why Toby Stevens I didn't have a big starring role in a movie again after this, because like he says, as his character Colonel Moon, he's like, you like it? I based my whole British demeanor on you, decadent Westerners. And it's like, okay, that's why you're trying to be this obnoxious. It's not because you're a bad actor, it's that you're deliberately trying to be annoying. But there's a point where it just gets too far, and it just was too much. Because I thought he was decent in some other things. I thought he made a great comeback in Black Sails. He was pretty good in that. I have yet to hear his audio dramas for Bond, but I do look forward to checking those out. So, I mean, this was just a misfire on so many levels. And again, they wasted Lawrence Mahore, who could have been a really cool henchman. Zhao, again, a character who's there to show off diamonds in his face, who doesn't really get to do too much. He's just kind of there, almost like a plot device. And like you said, Jinx is just terrible in this movie. And the fact that they were going to do a spin-off and ultimately it failed because Halle Berry found out that this MGM was getting cold feet about committing $80 million to a Jinx movie budget, whereas the Catwoman movie was ready to go. All she had to do was sign the dotted line, which is why we got Catwoman. So I guess we dodged a bullet. We Bond fans dodged a bullet there, but Batman and Catwoman fans did not dodge a bullet there. So it's just that's terrible.
How do you feel about the acronym for the movie being DAD?
Kind of ironic considering that the movie doesn't seem to be aimed towards that demographic at all.
I think that this movie is specifically directed towards middle-aged men.
See, I think it's directed towards kids. They've always tried to reel in the kids, and I kind of like why they didn't aim very high when casting Christmas Jones in the previous film. It's like, we'll get whoever's the young hot thing on TV right now because the kids like her. that kind of thing. And so,
Even when
that's
I
also how
saw,
Terry Hatcher got her role, by the way. They
even when
wanted.
even when I saw this movie originally, I was the guy who was like, I'm really looking forward to seeing this. And it's like, my friends who I saw it with were like, why? James Bond has somewhat always been a bit out of fashion.
I don't know. I mean, I think it. I mean, when Daniel Craig came along, he seemed to win over a lot of casual fans of all different generations, which is surprising. But
Well, Casino Royale is an amazing movie. It's an incredible movie. You
that's
don't
true.
need any reverence or knowledge of James Bond to see Casino Royale. However, if you see Die Another Day, oh, you better know who James Bond is and you better love him.
Yeah, that's why I was saying I wasn't really impressed with his performance. Like he does things like when he says certain puns, like, "Oh, I think I have always have my tip up," and the look on his face when he does it, he's like trying to like a lot of times it feels like the actors are like striking a pose, they're trying to look cool, and it's just like
Winking at
again the
the audience. I
non-innuendos,
think it's winking at the audience.
but winking way too hard. It's like
Oh
you would
yeah,
be
it's very
yeah, you would not be surprised if it actually went so far to literally have a character turn to the camera, break the fourth wall, and just wink. So it's just grating in all sorts of ways. It unfortunately the producers didn't think they could do a more grounded film after that for Pierce to go out on, which I thought he deserved. Firing him over the phone while he was filming After the Sunset in the Bahamas was just terrible.
well.
And
After the Sunset was terrible, and that's why he got fired.
it's not his fault though.
What that? Okay, fine. We'll blame Brett Ratner. How many martinis?
Oh God, maybe one or two. What do you give it?
Oh, I'm gonna give it. Oh, wait, hang on a second. Where are we? Octopussy, where are you? I gave Octopussy a 2. I give Die Another Day a 3. I give Die Another Day a 4.
Really?
Only because I want to spite Octopussy.
Well, I mean, a 4 is still pretty high. God, did I give anything a 1 on that list?
I don't know. Let's check.
I don't recall.
You did. You gave. Oh my God! You gave. You Only Live Twice a 1.
That's right, I did. And in that case, I'm gonna have to give this one a 1.
Twice. No, but You Only Live Twice is better than 1. If you're
well, that movie just really bored me stiff. Okay, I'll give this one a 2.
I don't mean no. You know what? I'm gonna allow the 1 because we will inevitably go over our lists.
All right. Yeah.
So, are you sincere in your 1?
Let's see. I gave Diamonds a 2. I think. It's in there. I mean, yeah. There's it's mildly entertaining. I'm 1.5, maybe a 2. What the hell? I'll just give it a 2.
Okay.
Or
I don't mean to.
no, I'm sorry. I have to give it a 1. Just a 1. 1
just
point.
a 1. Okay, we'll discuss
one martini. I'm just gonna give it 1 martini.
Well, I'm not one for planning myself, so it's fine.
Yeah.
I wanted to double check, but it's not my place to correct you. So anyway, now that that's over with, heavens, thank you. What's next?
The chat.
Yes, we are not alone. I forgot. This is live?
Yeah.
LDG, thank you so much. And the lovely Sherry is also here. It's also nice to see you.
Hello. See you.
And then Darren J. Seeley, it's always a pleasure to see you, sir. I believe that he was referring to specifically
Mhm.
So, do you remember 1997's Robinson Crusoe?
Only in name and that he was in it. I don't think I've ever seen it.
But have you seen, like, in your, as I tend to Google Pierce Brosnan,
No,
do you ever,
I've never seen any clips or anything from that.
you've never even seen him with a big bushy beard?
I might have and just didn't know what movie it was from, but I haven't seen it.
Fair enough.
Oh, that's
Do
another thing
you,
I forgot to mention.
oh,
The
yes.
fact that the whole thing of Bond being tortured and how horrible this is,
Yes.
they don't really, and how angry he is about it. All
Yes.
that anger kind of goes away once he cleans up in the hotel. It's like you figure that once he gets close to finding out who the traitor is, that he would just get really angry again, and he doesn't. Kind of like Alec Trevelyan, where, oh, I'm a Cossack. I have a very good reason to be seething with hatred, but I'm going to be calm and talk like a poet the whole time. It's like, okay, so that was something else. But yeah, that bushy beard thing reminded me of that because he did look like that when he came out of the prison. So yeah.
Okay. But you've never seen Robinson Crusoe?
No.
Okay. Canadian Spider-Man. Hello. Show hail. Oh, wait. Just hail. Hail to you, buddies. Buddy. Are you as excited to be a Canuck right now as I am? Biggest party on the planet this weekend in Ottawa. I am excited to be Canadian, and I endorse. Well, no, I don't. On behalf of the Phantasmagorium show, we do not endorse any political dissidents. But if you'd like to go and see where I enjoy Ottawa, go to Ottawa. It'll be fine. Good to see you, and I know that you don't prefer to hail, but it is fun for me to say. Well, hail. I don't like hail. Kat, how do you feel about hail?
It's okay.
All right. And then I said something. And then Darren J. Seeley said something about a bathroom break.
Yeah, when Mr. Kill was not in the room when Bond, like he says, I'm going to kill her with a laser. And he's like, oh, don't make a mess. And then when Bond takes a while to show up there, it's like she's still not dead and the laser's only going and he's not in the room. I'm like, where'd he go? It's like, this should have taken a second. And he's like, yeah, he must have taken a bathroom break.
Well, at least he washed his hands.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. They had to chop his hand off with one of the lasers to get out of the door. To use the fingerprint, palm print identification to get through the security door.
Oh, Tiki Fire came back. Tiki Fire says 4 martinis because I like everything up to the sword fight. Which you know what? I'll accept it.
Yeah, I'll say the action scene at the clinic was pretty good too. It's just that once they mentioned the gene therapy thing, and you're right, I kind of forget all the time about the whole Zen thing of shutting down his heart. It's like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. And then you're reminded that they're doing other things with this movie.
Well, and also it is ultimately a spectacle. It is an amazing James Bond spectacle that incorporates so many of the tropes and so many of the cliches. And also, it was before a time where it wasn't deconstructive Hollywood. It was still, it was playing alongside Austin Powers. And yeah, it's silly, but it's also really, you forget where you are for your entertainment and you realize that you're just in a James Bond movie, as opposed to being analytical, as opposed to being deconstructive. I think that Die Another Day is awful, but it's better than Octopussy.
I didn't think Octopussy was as cringe as this film. I mean, it has some ridiculous things in it, no doubt.
Well,
but
you put Madonna in Octopussy.
She's not in Octopussy, so.
No, I know, but if you did,
I'm
just saying, if you could trade players. So anyway, now that we've done the martinis, I suppose
Any other chats?
Sorry?
Any other chats?
Darren J. Seeley, let's see. Tiki Fire. Agreed, then it goes off the whales. And Darren gives it 2.5 martinis. But I still dig Die Another Day as a guilty pleasure. You know what? I always have fun whenever I find this movie, whether I'm sharing it with other people, being like, you want to know what a bad James Bond movie is? Or, you want to know my dad's favorite James Bond movie? I enjoy it because I don't like it.
Yeah.
But I adore it. It's like a dirty stuffed animal.
You enjoy it because you don't like it. That's a new one.
I enjoy it because I don't like it. Guilty pleasure, though, the awful CGI, water when Bond windsurfs, of course.
Oh, funny story about that. When they ported the film over to Blu-ray for the Bond set, they excluded that featurette talking about that because the CG artists in the original featurette on the DVD were so proud of that. And it's like, yeah, we can't do that to them now because their names are on it and everything. So that's the one bonus feature that did not make its way to the Blu-ray.
And then, by the way, I always thought the reason why Miranda showed up dressed that way in the final fight was to show off Rosamund Pike's workout results. Yeah, but...
Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah, no, it's totes true. But the thing is that you have to have an in-universe reason for her to be dressed like a supervillain.
Well, come to think of it, Halle Berry was dressed the same way. She had this little flak jacket on with a crop top or something. And it's like,
no,
okay.
but she had done like a bunch of spy stuff, and they were in environments and everything like that. And she was taking stuff up, taking stuff off along the way.
Yeah.
But like Miranda shows up, and she's just like, "This is what I woke up and decided to wear."
No, I mean, I'm talking specifically about the airplane scene.
Oh well, then
where
you're
they
probably
get
right.
Plane, kind of just taking, both of them are kind of skimping down. But yeah, he's probably right. That's why it's probably there. You'll notice that happens a lot. Like when actors do work out like that, and they don't think it's getting really shown off on film, they want to have little moments like that to say, "Hey, I want to show them that it's really me or that I actually did it."
Well, it's also very rare to have exotic costuming in a James Bond film. Usually they're dressed quite conservatively. So anyway, that has been Die Another Day. And no, that is the end of the chat. Thank you all, everyone. Darren J. Seeley, Tiki Fire.
Bring the logo back up then.
The what?
Take the text off the screen.
Oh, but okay, fine. Jesus,
so we can see, so they can see where to find us.
Where do we find us?
Right there, our Facebook, YouTube, and Fantasmagorium show.
Right.
Yeah, you got to bring that back up.
Once again, you have been thinking more clearly than I. So this is the end of an eon.
It is. We have officially finished reviewing all 25 Eon films. Next week, we will return with the unofficial Bond film, Never Say Never Again.
Oh, but I wanted to know.
Why not?
Okay, fine. Never Say Never Again. Okay.
Why not?
Well, here was what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Kat, can I see you at camera 2?
Yeah.
All right. So what I was thinking is that we could watch the David Niven Casino Royale next week so that we could end with a relatively competent James Bond movie.
Oh, I thought we were going to end with the first Casino Royale from 1954. Which one you want to do next week?
What do you want to do next week? What do you want to do? Casino Royale, or you want to see? You want to do Never Never?
I thought we would do Never, but because that would be in line with the fact that we've reviewed 25 actual Bond films, and it's still an actual Bond film, just not from Eon. And to your point of it being competent, it would be in line with, the other 25. Whereas the Woody Allen thing it's like its whole other beast.
No, I know, but I want to do something bad before we do other good things. I don't want to end on bad.
Well, aren't we going to review other other spoof type films related to Bond?
Yeah.
Besides that?
Yeah.
Okay. So Casino Royale then?
1967's David Niven?
Is that the one you want to do?
Yes.
Okay, we'll do that.
I love it when a plan comes together. Wrong franchise.
It's really not. We're going to swap a competent Bond film with an incompetent, incoherent film.
We are going to watch something. Yeah, no, we're going to watch something bad next week so that we can get to something good the week after.
All right, whatever.
All right, well, we apologize for having a domestic in front of you all, but we appreciate you paying attention to Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns. Thank you again. Kat, where can people find you on the internet?
Hopefully on my desktop next week. I don't know. It's probably not going to happen, but because this is admittedly really annoying. But I'll figure it. I don't know.
It'll be fine. Anyway, thank you again for hanging out. Apologies for all of the things. And once again, much like this podcast, James Bond will return.